This episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com. This episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com. This episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com. This episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com. This episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com. This episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com. This episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument.
I'm Brant Taylor, and super happy to be back here doing another one of these chats for Cello Bello. It's been a little while since I've done one of these, and obviously we've had a very atypical year in the meantime. So happy to be back and look forward to answering your questions. And before I do that, though, I just wanted to maybe spend a few minutes chatting and about a couple things that have been on my mind recently, from lessons taught, coachings, classes, from my own practice, that have sort of coalesced into a set of questions, and curious if any of you have thoughts on those as well. I read a book, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago by an author named James Clear, and the book is called Atomic Habits. And I don't know if any of you have run across it, but it deals with basically the general topic of how we are in our lives the product of the very small, regular habits that we cultivate, whether those are what we might call positive habits that we want or habits that maybe we don't want. In every case, they amalgamate and they make us into the person and living the life that we live. And one of the things that he said in the book that I've been thinking about since then is that, I'm not sure I'm getting the words exactly right, but he said the greatest risk to our productivity is always the same. It's working on the wrong thing. And of course, as a cellist, I started thinking immediately, well, am I guilty of that? And how does that apply to our practice process? And with my own students, I've sort of been thinking about that and noticing that the tendency, and we're all, cellists of different ages doing different things, but we tend to, when we're working on the cello, be down in the weeds in the practice room. I think our tendency is very much, if we're learning a piece, we're learning that piece, we're learning the notes, we're looking for bowings and fingerings, and we're looking for phrases, and we're looking for the composer's message and trying to get that across. And I guess I like to think of our work, or I'm trying to think of our work, as having sort of concentric circles around it. And what I just mentioned is maybe the innermost concentric circle, where you're really down dealing with a particular phrase in a particular piece, working on intonation and shifting and all the techniques of cello playing that help us with that. And what are the concentric circles that are out from that? Could be things like a general sense of the composer's language, for example. If we're playing a Beethoven sonata, what else do we know by Beethoven, and how can we relate that to that? Even further out, maybe in a technical sense, doesn't have so much to do with cello techniques and bow control and all that, but are we sitting well? Is our body free? Are we mobile or are we static? Are we aiming to play elegantly, for example, physically elegantly? And this is where I feel like, and I'm catch myself doing it too, some of us actually fall a bit short in the practice room. And I feel like it can be quite helpful to take a step back and remember that the practice room really is a place for experimentation. And I feel like many of us maybe fall a bit short in terms of really using it that way because we're quite results focused. We can be, as I say, down in the weeds with the piece. And at a certain point, if something isn't getting better the way that we hope it will, or maybe we practice it and then we have a performance and the performance doesn't go as well as we hoped based on our practice, why is that? And I feel like maybe some of the answers to that question can be found in these outer concentric circles. I think probably we've all had the experience of realizing that if there's a passage that's not going well after we've practiced it repeatedly, that what it needs actually isn't more practice, or at least not more of the same type of practice. What it really needs is probably a higher level of physical relaxation while we're executing it. And this is something that, again, we can easily forget when we're busy doing the thing. So I guess I'm thinking myself, and maybe would encourage you, if it's useful to you, to spend some of your practice time thinking about these things, making playing feel good, not just, get this done at whatever cost. I think maybe, I wonder if you'd all agree that at a high level in playing, or one of the keys to getting to higher and higher levels in our playing is actually that, which is going for a higher level of physical elegance. Some of the music we play is elegant in character, other music is not, but in our effort to not have the music make us unnecessarily tight, even when the music itself is tense and intense, can we still play that music with an elegant physical language at the cello? I think the answer is yes. And sometimes, again, just backing off in our practice and saying, I'm going to make this feel good. I'm going to make it feel ergonomic, feel natural, can be a step that we just, occasionally forget to include in our practice. I think one other thing on this general topic, I think I mentioned, being results focused. Sometimes it's interesting to think about the dichotomy between results focused and process focused, and when one might be better or more desirable than the other. What is results focused? Obviously, sort of self-explanatory. I guess we're paying attention to our sound, to the phrasing, to the end result of our work, and that's probably good a lot of the time. I think if that doesn't produce the results we want, then at some point we have to look at our process of getting there and be process focused. And I think maybe one of the keys to doing that, I was just talking about this in a lesson a couple of days ago, that in order to be process focused in the practice room, we have to let go of the result. And that's not often, we can fall a bit short in that regard. What's an actual example of that? Say we're trying to practice making our shifts, long shifts, feel as natural as possible. Now, at some point while doing that, we're going to have to let go of the result. We're going to have to let go of the need to play in tune at the other end of the shift. We might or we might not, but if the goal is to make the shift as natural feeling as possible, then if we play a shift and it feels natural, but we miss the note we're heading for, that's a victory, right? Some of us can be, even when we're alone in the practice room, kind of mortified of playing anything out of tune. And I think we have to be willing to risk playing out of tune and to forget about the result while we are focused on a particular process. So if something feels great, and that's what we're aiming for, then okay, we can search for the intonation with that new language. But again, just trying to clarify the dichotomy between results and process focused, and make sure that we have the possibility to do both. And if we know ourselves well, which hopefully we do, then hopefully we know if we're the type of person who tends to maybe gravitate to one or the other. For a lot in our head, thinking about the processes and not listening to the result, that's one thing. If we can, sometimes we just need to forget that and say, let me listen to what's happening here. Let me really listen to the sound, and then my hands are going to start to find those things. So those are just a few thoughts that have been on my mind and that have come up kind of with some frequency in teaching recently. So I thought I would throw them out there for you all, and hope they're useful, and obviously happy to continue a conversation about that if people want to. So I see there are some questions starting to come in. I will just start right at the top of the list here. Hello, Mr. Taylor. Often while playing in the cello section of an orchestra, I find that it's difficult to hear my own playing in certain passages, and I worry that I'm playing out of tune or with an unpleasant sound without realizing it. How do you know that you're contributing a net positive to the sound of your section in these situations? This is a good question. What is the best, how can I organize my thoughts? I think couple things. One is part of the reason we practice alone is so that we learn sort of automatically to be able to trust that certain things will be true. We know that, we get to know our instruments so well purely as machines. We know from practice, if I put this effort into it, this will come out. If I put more effort in, more will come out. If I put too much effort in, then, negative results come out. So part of being able to fit into a section, I think, means just trusting that a little bit and trusting the physical feeling of your playing. Obviously, our ears play a super important role, and this is sort of the essence of your question, is if you can't hear yourself well, why might that be, and what can you do? I think creating a situation as best you can with your stand partner where you feel a little bit like you are playing chamber music with each other and doing your best to keep your ears open to what's happening around you, that's never going to be a bad thing. It doesn't always completely solve the issue, because if it's a super loud passage where the heavy artillery in the back row of the orchestra are blaring, I don't think there's, I wouldn't be being earnest if I said there aren't times where I feel the same as you do, which is that I can't really hear my own sound as well as I might like to. I do think, however, that when we are at odds with our section, it is easier to hear that. So if our section has a general intonation and one of you happen to be the member that's a little bit, off from the intonation of the section on a particular note, that is maybe more obvious to hear. And so it makes it easy to correct. It happens in every orchestra, including mine. If we land on low Fs on the Fs and F sharps on the C string, I call it F sharp-itis. It's like just a hard note to match with 10 other people. And so often as we get to something like that, I'll see many of my colleagues' heads kind of turn a little bit toward their cellos, just to make sure that we're hearing our own sounds as best we can and trying to match. So it's a process of trial and error always, and awareness is key. And also just knowing that sometimes in a section we can get caught up in the excitement of the music and the conductors, wanting more. And so the tendency to press or to play a little bit more harshly than we would in our practice room starts to be there a little bit. So maybe a little bit of that enthusiasm is okay. And, if there's a little bit of grit in somebody's sound temporarily, that would get lost or would just contribute to the general section sound. But I think, keeping a sense of refinement even in the biggest playing is a desirable quality. And so, keep an eye on yourself, and then obviously keep an ear on yourself and those around you too. And I think you can be reasonably confident about your contribution being a net positive, hopefully. It's a good question though. Next question from Ethan Brown. Hi, Ethan. He is asking, how do you go about practicing for consistency when it comes to auditions? This is a good question, kind of a broad question, and maybe not that different from how we would go about practicing for consistency, period, in anything. Certainly, the answer begins in the practice room, as you stated in your question. And I guess the first thing that comes to my mind, if someone is a little bit inconsistent under pressure, is that is an invitation to that person to be even more specific in their practice. I've talked in these chats before, probably, and certainly to my students, about the difference between specific and general. And if something goes well consistently in the practice room, but we don't actually take the time to examine it enough to understand specifically what makes it go well, then we're leaving ourselves a little bit open to, I don't want to say danger, but you know what I mean. We're leaving the possibility open that when the stage lights are on and it's the time to play, whether it's an audition or any other kind of performance, that we find in that moment that we just didn't know quite specifically enough how to make something go well. So an audition is probably not a time to pull inspiration out of thin air. I think it's very much a time to have a plan, literally for, sounds cliche to say it, but have a plan for every note you're playing and to figure out what makes these things go well. And just to go back to my earlier rant at the beginning, make sure that your preparation includes not only the micro motions that we make that make our intonation or our sound consistent, but includes, the general physical choreography or ballet of cello playing that makes it work. Why do I say that? Because normally when people are free in the practice room, what can happen without them realizing it in the audition is that suddenly they're rigid from the waist up and the arms are trying to do what they've done in the practice room, and the player doesn't necessarily realize that there's just an overall tension there. It can come from not being free to, be mobile, to move. It can be because we breathe well in the practice room, and then suddenly in the performance, we're breathing only with the top 10% of our lungs. So these are, in my opinion, super important things to include in our practice. It's not I promise it's not a cop-out answer to the question to pull up to 30,000 feet and look down at your playing from that angle, because I trust you and everybody here in auditions that there's usually not we're usually not shy on the detailed down in the weeds work, but we can be a little shy on the other things that are an important part of that. But just to come back to the specific question, what does that mean in a given excerpt? It means different things. It might mean technical things. When I start the La Mer excerpt, for example, do I think about, adjectives for the sound? Maybe. Or maybe I just think, I want to put the bow on the string at the tip and start here. And I know that if the bow is here and I give myself a good preparatory gesture, I'm automatically going to be making the sound that I want to make. So what specific means can vary, but it's kind of up to you to figure out that, what makes something work for you. then I guess the last thing I could suggest is don't wait until the audition to set up situations where your heart's beating a little bit faster and you feel the rush of adrenaline that comes from a performance. It's possible, and maybe even more possible these days with all the online possibilities, to set up low stress, medium stress, and then sort of high stress situations so that you can check. It's like a feedback loop. You practice, you have specific ideas, you can do them when you're alone. Then the next step, which we don't want to skip, is, can I take it on the road? Can I take it out? Can I play it for, my friend who knows nothing about music? That would be a low stress situation. Can I play it for a couple friends who are musicians but not cello players? That would be slightly higher. Can I play it for a room full of cellists, or cello colleagues that I admire? That would be maybe one of the situations that to us feels the most challenging, is to truly play for our peers. So certainly set up those situations so that you can see directly what in your practice room translates to a performance situation and what doesn't. And for the things that don't, again, as I said at the beginning, that's your invitation to go back and be even more specific about what produces the consistent result. It's a kind of a long answer to your question, but I hope I got to the heart of something that's going to be useful for you. Next question is from Aristide Pierre. How is Starker's cello treating you these days? Has it developed more? He is referring to an instrument I own that was a modern cello that Mr. Starker, my teacher, owned. It was made in 1977 by a Portuguese maker. I don't have it here, or I would show it to you. But yes, it's treating me very well. The thing I use it, I actually play it in the orchestra pretty consistently these days. And going back to the first question, this cello has a sort of a bright, clear sonority that I find makes it easier for me to hear my own sound in my section. So I like that. And because it gets played quite consistently, I would say it has developed. It's hard for me to have objectivity on it because I'm the one who plays it every day. I kind of wish I could go back to, years ago and remember what it sounded like when I got it. But yes, it's a fine instrument. It's coming up on its, 44th birthday. So yes, it's a pleasure for me to play on it and a privilege to have it for sure. Next question from Francesca. Hi, Francesca. She asks, do you have advice on developing more clarity of articulation? Yes, I do. Obviously, we're talking about a relatively broad subject that means different things in different times in music, but I'm fond of just the nutshell thinking about this, that remember that there's some certain things that only the arm can do, and there's certain things in our playing that only the hand can do. And only the arm can move the bow back and forth. The hand, try as it might, just can't move the bow very far. But the arm is such a blunt instrument that only the hand can add articulation. Whether it's, hard consonant articulations, softer articulations, the control of that really is something that's in the hand. So if we're playing a super fast stroke, obviously for spiccato, it's a variation on the theme. But if we're talking about clarity of articulation for, notes like that, just ringing short notes. You can see what my arm's doing, I hope, and you can see also what my hand's doing. And so obviously up bow and down bow feel a little bit different because the direction of the bow is different, but the motion of the hand and the arm doesn't have to feel that different, I hope. So there's a consistency there, I hope, to be found, or another level, by just remembering where articulation truly comes from. In terms of things that can get in the way of clarity of articulation, remember our bow habits, right? Obviously, there's the holy trinity of weight, speed, and contact point, and then there's the next one I came up with, which is the other holy trinity that we forget about, which is bow angle, amount of hair used, and tightness of the stick. So it's possible, I see, depending on the excerpt or piece that somebody's playing, that clarity of articulation can suffer specifically only because somebody's sawing a little bit askew to the ideal angle at the string, or being way, way over on the side of the hair. Both of those things to me will compromise articulation. The exercise I'll sometimes give people is start at the tip 10 times on the open C string. And immediately what people realize is if you're over on the side of the hair, you can't get the attention of the string. If I'm on the flat of the hair, I can get the attention of the string right away. So yeah, I without any more specific information about a particular piece of music, that might be the best advice I can offer at this point. But it's always going to be a question of knowing having in your thought bubble the set of good habits that we know we want, and then experimenting to find which combination works. Depending on the way that you hold the bow also, I find that the more someone's bow hand tends toward what I would call a neutral position or back this way, I don't generally advocate that for this reason, but let's say the more we go toward front loaded, the easier it is to have consistent articulation because the hand is oriented toward this important mechanism at the front of the hand, which flexes the bow and scoops the bow into the string. So just last bit of advice is if we're a little bit casual with the bow hand, sometimes we can lose the possibility for clarity of articulation. So maybe, put your pinky up on the top of the stick for 10 seconds and see what that does to your hand. Then you can bring your pinky down where it normally is and hopefully feel like you have an orientation on the stick that will give you greater control and clarity. Good. Next question. Hi, Neeraj. What does your practice process look like the day before or day of a performance? And does it differ when it's a solo performance? Those are good questions. I would say it might differ a little bit if it's a solo performance as opposed to an orchestral performance, because of the nature of my work, I'm on stage with an orchestra 3 or 4 nights a week. So it's not really possible to have the same practice process every day. I might be teaching all afternoon and then going straight to a concert. Another day I might have a couple of good hours to practice before the concert. So in terms of, I think what you're asking about is what am I practicing? What is most useful to practice right before a performance? Ideally, we feel ready for the performance long before the day before or the day of. And so I generally encourage people in the days before a performance to start to shift their mentality more and more towards what we might call a performance mentality. Not that we haven't had that, obviously we want to have that as part of our practice generally, but just sort of confirming that there's less room and less benefit to be gained by being in the weeds at that point. Of course, we can tidy up certain things till right before we walk on stage if we want to, but shifting our mind to the communicative aspects of music, and playing, if we're going to practice the day of a performance, if we're going to practice the day before, let it be no difference between what you're doing in the practice room and what you hope to do for the audience. Less down and watching your left hand, more up and out, and just pure generosity of expression and musical communication. On a more practical level, it's possible to overdo practice right before a performance. So obviously, we want to avoid that if we can. If I have a recital in the evening, I will, get some practice in, some just sort of slow, deliberate warm up to make me feel at home at the cello. Obviously, I'm not going to play the whole program through. I'm probably not even going to play large parts of the program through the day of, maybe the day before, yes, but you want to reach a point of trust with yourself that you don't actually have to play them. You've decided what you're going to do with the music. So the main goal on the day of a performance is to play and warm up in a way that makes you feel super connected to the instrument. And that might mean just long tones. It might mean playing a little bit of your repertoire under tempo. It might mean playing other music that you just play for enjoyment. So could mean any of those things, but what it doesn't mean, to me anyway, is sort of in any kind of intense, detailed practice of details in the music, because that should ideally have taken place before that. And I encourage people preparing for performances to actually set up a calendar where you either a week or 10 days or even 2 weeks before a recital or an important performance, you should feel like you could play it, that day. And then you can use your time leading up to it to, again, maybe test things out for other people, and to, think more philosophically, shall we say, about music and communication and the finesse involved in cello playing, and less about the, this note or that bowing or, that type of thing. So hope that's helpful. Next question is from Angela. She says, you talked a lot about focusing on your body and how it feels to play something well or easily. Do you practice any physical activities like yoga or Feldenkrais to gain more body awareness? Yes, I do. I have done different things through the years. I have done yoga. For several years, I was doing fitness classes that are vaguely called bar fitness, BARRE, that combine kind of body weight and strength and flexibility, which flexibility was new to me. As I got closer to middle age, I started to realize the importance of that. And so anything that increases that is great. Feldenkrais, yes, for a while I was going quite regularly to a Feldenkrais instructor, and I read one of Moshe Feldenkrais's books, and I mentioned middle age, which is where I am, and I think most of us, as we get into our 30s and especially 40s, we realize that we have to be more aware of our body, for sure. It's never too early to start, but teenagers and 20-somethings can actually get away with punishing themselves in ways that old and crusty folks like me can't anymore. So in my case, I don't want to say forced, but I came to knowledge of body awareness because of I felt like I had to. Things started to feel different, and I thought, okay, you need to understand this better. It would have been maybe ideal if I had more of an interest in it when I was, in my early 20s, but it is what it is. So yes, yoga, and you mentioned two of the probably the best ones in terms of developing body awareness. Even meditation, I have found is a super useful and productive way to gain body awareness. So again, there's lots of roads that lead to Rome, I think. But again, from each of us, if you have something that speaks to you and works well, it can only be a good thing for sure. Also, and I don't want to, this is probably material for another chat, but just, a general good level of physical fitness is quite useful in cello playing. I waited a while to realize that myself, but yeah, it makes a certain amount of sense, doesn't it? If all the fitness we have for cello playing, we learn playing the cello, then by definition, we don't have anything in reserve. So if we practice and our muscles develop the way they are in the practice room, and then suddenly we have a couple of intense performances, then we can really feel that because we're pushing our body beyond what it's accustomed to. Whereas even a little bit of sensible strength training, flexibility training, just to build something in the, particularly in the shoulders, upper back, for me, it was a revelation to do that. Wasn't anything intense, but the bow started to feel more like a toothpick in my hand, if you have excess strength, and then sort of insulate yourself against the possibility for injury because you have a little bit in reserve. Your body's a little bit, conditioned above and beyond what you do for actual playing. So yes, that's a good question. And the answer is an emphatic yes. And I recommend it to everybody to find something that increases, strength and awareness of the body. Breathing is a whole other category. But obviously breath awareness that comes from yoga and meditation as well is super useful in playing. Next question is from Paloma Serrano. Hi, Paloma. She says, do you have any tips for improving the use of the bow? Wow. It would be difficult to, yes, I do. It would be difficult to boil it down too much, but let me, at the risk of maybe saying what everybody already knows, there are certain things we do with the bow that sort of uniformly produce good results, right? They just objectively produce good results and good sound. So we're talking about the mechanics of playing the instrument. So getting a good grip on the string with the right angle, with good hair, letting our weight down, using our weight and speed. We know that that's going to produce a good result at the cello. Each of the strings varies a little bit, but getting more familiar with how each string responds to the bow is obviously going to improve the way we can use it. I think on another level, the answer to your question is improving our use of the bow means broadening our palette of different ways that we can use it. Are we familiar with what it means to play with, a very light bow very quickly? Do we know what it feels like to play soltato? Can we play a very intense bow right near the bridge, very slowly? Why would we practice those things? Well, because then when we need them in music, they're there. It's a part of our physical language. So you could go about this, different ways. You could pick a piece of, music that involves a lot of different colors and potential for color change. I like to give people the Vocalise of Rachmaninoff, among other pieces, for this reason, because it's constantly involving changing the contact point, changing the density of the sound in a long spinning melody. So find a piece, could be that, could be something else, and then really use your imagination. This is the less practical side of improving our use of the bow, is our ears have to demand a wide variety of sounds. And so if you're a person who likes to think in terms of adjectives or just color and nuance in the sound, then if you can hear that in your ear, your hands are going to be searching for it automatically, and you might find that you're using the bow in a way that's more creative than you would if you just said, okay, I'm going to practice using faster bow or slower bow. But in a basic sense, I think, to go back to the idea that we have to experiment in order to make progress, let some of your practice time be on this. Single notes, long tones. If I play that was an even bow. My goal was just to have it be constant speed from one end to the other. Now, what happens if I do that but use faster bow speed? How did that change the sound? What if I use slower bow speed? Those are three different sounds already, and we're just thinking about not really changing the contact point or much else. I'm just changing bow speed. Then we can change the contact point and do the same thing. So if you're more of a sort of methodical, if you want to approach it from that type of organization, great. If you want to be guided by, a piece of music that's full of the possibility for color, do that. But be prepared to step outside your comfort zone. It sounds like maybe you've gotten the comment that, you can be more creative in your use of the bow. And that's just an invitation to try things. What's the worst that can happen in a practice room is you try something and it sounds ridiculous, but then we've learned something from that too. So I would say that we're all only limited by our own, imagination when it comes to this type of thing. So I encourage you to, there's no one magic answer to the question, but try things. And I think you'll be broadening your palette just by doing that alone. Great. Next question is from YouTube Live. When comparing instruments for purchase, how do you take into account, I think, all of the factors of the setup that influence the sound, like strings, bridge, sound post, tailpiece? It's a good question. How can I best answer it? Obviously, well, let's start by stating the obvious, which is all those elements of the setup that you mentioned do have an effect on the way that an instrument sounds and responds. I think whether you're getting an instrument from another individual or from a shop or dealer that's, loaning it to you to try, I think most sellers of instruments make a point of trying to set up their instruments in a way that makes them most agreeable and most kind of straightforward, rather than a setup that's really quirky, that has too many weird aspects to it. So I think you can, if you're trying 2 or 3 instruments and you're trying to figure that out, the strings that's obviously the one that's easiest to change, and you don't have to ask anybody to change that. You can take the strings off the cello and put strings that you like on. If you strongly feel that something else about the instrument might be out of adjustment, then certainly any dealer that's selling an instrument is usually willing to alter the setup, whether it's the bridge feed or the placement of the post, in a reasonable way to try to go after what it is that you want. Tailpiece is a little more challenging because that involves taking the whole setup down. But if you know the way that particular tailpieces influence the sound, then you can also use your imagination a little bit to be able to tell what it might sound like with a different tailpiece. It's possible to drive yourself a bit crazy with this stuff. Full disclosure, I'm not really a tinkerer. I'm one of the cello gang that's, find something that I like, that works well, and I'm not going to try every new thing that comes out just because somebody else says, oh, these new strings are the best thing since, sliced bread. I've changed some aspects of the setup of my cello through the years, but I'm a little bit of a minimalist. So what does that mean for your question? It means you're probably getting a decent sense of the personality of the instruments you're trying, regardless of the setup. So if you want to tweak it a little bit one way or other, the post, the bridge feet, the strings, great, just to see if you can get it perfect. But part of the nature of looking at instruments, for better or worse, is that we're making an educated guess that something has enough of what we want that we can take it and work with it. So I would be, maybe equally concerned with other things. Like what's the, does the instrument respond well? Does it make a different color when I'm playing softly as opposed to loudly, and that type of thing. So I wish you luck with your search. And again, don't hesitate to ask for minor changes if you want them, but at a certain point, we just have to sort of accept what we're getting as the personality of an instrument and then decide whether it's the right one for us. Next question is from Juan saying, how do you teach vibrato? Okay, this is going to be a nutshell version. And it's a little bit of a rabbit hole to go down, but I'll give you the quickest version I can. Let's start by saying too that vibrato and maybe spiccato are the two aspects of playing that we can, as a teacher, the teacher can give as much of the right information to a student as possible, but there's no getting around the fact that the student or all of us at some point just have to search and experiment and find what vibrato means for us. A teacher can come over and actually hold our bow arm and make it move in the right way, and we can somehow feel that way. It's of limited use for a teacher to grab our left hand and try to make it vibrate in exactly the right way. So it really is something that we develop just through trial and error. I think it's important to realize that depending on the angle of our hand to the instrument, our vibrato motion is going to be different. The more square someone's hand is, the more the vibrato, by necessity, has to resemble of the rocking motions, a little bit like turning a doorknob, vibrato that's, like this. The more angled someone's hand is, the closer to violin we get, which many cellists use an angle of some kind in their left hand, the more our primary vibrato can become what I call the pump. I think I learned this from Paul Katz, actually. Rocking, pumping. Why is it called pump? Because it's sort of a pumping motion that's more vertical in nature and uses the entire forearm. And violinists, when they do it, they call it an arm vibrato, because obviously the fingers are involved, but at its heart, there's an element of the entire forearm that's involved. This is the right way. This. And it exploits the flexibility in the very last knuckle of our finger. Hopefully you can see this well. What is the difference between the two in sound? They have certain tendencies. I find it easier to play with a narrow shimmery vibrato with the pumping motion. And then when I need to add real richness for the C string or for something that's, very, want a wide, rich vibrato, I can let my hand start to rock as well. So unlike shifting, for example, where there's a couple different motions and it usually doesn't work well to combine them, I think the ideal vibrato for a given player involves knowledge of these two motions and how they relate to your hand, and then the knowing that the possibility exists to combine them. So understanding that in terms of teaching vibrato, that's certainly the first step, is just awareness of what the motions are. Then we can go into quite a bit more detail. We can start slow. We can start to add rhythmic component, to have a metronome on and to gain control of vibrato by doing it slowly. If someone's vibrato is kind of, wild and uncontrolled, there are ways that we can gain control. And then a lot of the rest of the way that I address vibrato with my students usually has to do with encouraging them to not overuse a particular default vibrato, but in reality to have a vibrato that's as adaptable and versatile as possible as a phrase changes. And again, we can be guided by the technical aspects, or we can just be guided by our ears, and then let our hands sort of search for the answers. So I hope that sort of answers the question. It's a combination of base knowledge, and then how do we apply it, and why would we want to apply it for a particular result. High up the A string, just register on the cello, tends to respond better to narrower and more shimmery vibrato. The C string doesn't usually respond well to that, so by nature, we're probably going to be talking about a wider vibrato on the low strings. And I find, just last thing, that usually nobody has a variation in their vibrato that's too wide, meaning they have too many vibratos and they're using too many things at the same time. Most of us tend toward the opposite end of the spectrum, where we have a couple of vibratos that we gravitate to and we use them pretty consistently. And so the next step in terms of artistic freedom is actually to step away from that and to try to feel our hands doing different things, and to listen, either by recording ourselves or just in the moment, if we can, to really listen to how our vibrato is changing the sound. And for most of us, our vibrato motion doesn't change the sound as much as we think it does. So in order to get a vibrato that sounds rich and wide on a recording, we might have to do something that sounds almost ridiculous with our left hand. But again, hey, in that situation, we're being results focused. It's all about how it sounds. We want to make it feel good as well, but listening to the result in this is as important as understanding the physical motions. So that's a good question, broad question. You guys are asking all the big questions here. Next one is from Thomas. How do you balance preparing so much orchestral repertoire with your busy performance schedule? I've gotten better at it as I've done this longer. And the good news is that it's gotten easier for me because I've been playing in an orchestra for many years now that, plays different music every week. And so the amount of the standard orchestral repertoire that I know has grown. And I know, the pieces that come up the most often. It took me quite a bit of time the first time to learn them thoroughly. And then each successive time, I remember more of my fingerings for the challenging places. And so the good news is, I don't know how old you are, but the good news is it gets easier over time. So if you're feeling overwhelmed with, a bunch of orchestral rep to learn and other things going on, it does get easier the longer we do it. And the other aspect of that is actually I've learned to become incredibly efficient, or at least as efficient as I can be, more so than I used to be, for sure, by necessity. So the idea that an hour of great focused practice on something is better than 2 or 3 hours of sort of absent-minded repetition of certain things. So yeah, it is a balancing act, and I don't always achieve the ideal balance, but starting early and seeing what's coming ahead of time is always a good thing, because it prevents having to, cram something at the last minute, which isn't a feeling that any of us like, I think. So it's a good question. I hope that was an acceptable answer. I think actually one of the things we learn, and we start usually to learn this when we're probably in college, when we start having, more control over our own time and the ability to manage our time well. All of us make mistakes and we manage our time poorly, and then we, regret something, and then, we learn from that. So that doesn't stop in the professional world, because I have less time to practice now than I did when I was in school. I'm teaching a lot more than I did, and there's other things going on. So it's great to be busy. I'm not complaining about that at all. But it does take a certain amount of planning, and actually just relying on previous work. So know that whatever work we're doing in the practice room now on this particular piece, developing these habits, is actually, I like to say, watering the roots of the tree rather than, the leaves. Where if we're changing our playing in fundamental ways, then our preparation and ability to deal with a lot of music only gets greater as time goes on. So next question is from David. He says, thank you for sharing your time. Don Juan is one of the toughest excerpts. Do you have any advice to achieve precision and musicality? I do. Yes, they're not mutually exclusive things, hopefully. I think I was just talking to a student about this the other day, that sometimes we forget in Don Juan or other tone poems by Strauss that really character, like, why is that on a list? Well, it's on a list to learn because it has challenges in it, but what it gives the player a chance to show isn't just that you can surmount those challenges. What it really gives the player a chance to show is panache and a sense of the character. So in terms of achieving musicality, start with that. What is the character of this piece? It has their different characters in it, but in a general sense, it's a very, very vivacious character sketch of a pretty colorful character. So what does that mean when we put the bow on the string? To me, it means that the types of quick motions that I was talking about earlier in Francesca's question about articulation, those strokes play an incredibly important role in Don Juan. It's possible to play this excerpt well, but with a slightly sleepy bow hand. So you played it, you played the notes, you played it correctly, in tune with good rhythm, but there was something missing. And often I find what people miss in this piece is just the sense of, it's like Zorro taking out his sword. It's like risk taking, the sense of risk taking. Obviously, we're not wanting to take unnecessary risks with our performance of it, but the musical sense of carefree, just, sort of abandon. So how do we get that? We get that, by remembering that the character is mostly to do with the right hand. Obviously, a nice zing in vibrato will help as well, but it's mostly a right hand thing. How do we achieve precision? There are different types of precision. I find that rhythmic precision is actually the hardest one, seems to be the hardest one for folks to get in this one. Especially right at the opening. There's a lot of stop and start playing. There's some rests, and just to be able to play triplets followed by 16ths, followed by dotted rhythms, followed by something that starts off of a 16th rest, and to do that all in one tempo, it's challenging. We want to make sure we have a good sense of inner pulse, and then we can, hopefully just weather all of the changing rhythms. So rhythmic precision, for sure. In terms of other kinds of precision, I would encourage you to be precise in your thinking about what there is beyond the printed page. This is at least at the beginning, first page is mostly loud playing. The famous section toward the end from R to T is again mostly loud playing. So be precise in your intentions as well, knowing that besides playing the cello well, there's a whole world of potential for nuance, for changing our sounds, for shaping things. It's not directly indicated by Strauss, but those are definitely things that give our technique a greater sense of purpose. So don't leave that out. I find that, especially in an excerpt like this, it can be sort of again, as I said before, just a question of, I just want to get this done as well as possible. But there's a different way to look at it than that. And it's sort of from a standpoint of musical inspiration. And then you can, vary your technique. Let me give you one example of that. I've been talking and you're probably thinking, show me something. As one example, toward the end of the first page. There's that passage. So there's nothing indicated by the composer, but one of those G sharps is a strong vertical arrival, right? That's a downbeat. The next G sharp is not necessarily a strong vertical arrival. That's actually the beginning of a phrase that blossoms into the next bar. So I hear a lot, two very vertical arrivals on those notes. And to me, it just, again, if we think about it a little bit, we can find something that's actually quite useful there, which is there's, a vertical arrival, and then this next note actually opens toward the next bar. None of that is indicated by the composer, but the things that you need to play this music well, and any music well, are usually not the things that are printed on the page. So I would encourage you to look beyond the page and to find your idea of the musicianship in the piece by asking yourself, what's actually happening musically? Then precision comes as you work on how to do that as well as possible. And you can achieve, cellistic precision because of your musical aim. Good. Next question from Martin Kalejian. Can you please talk about posture and lower back tension? Okay. Sometimes I wish I was an orthopedist, but I'm the opposite of an orthopedist. What I do know is that the way that, part of finding the ideal posture means stacking our lumbar spine in a way that is as effortless as possible. And we have to search for that. It is possible to find it. But we have to search for it. And I think it helps to search for it without the cello first. So it's possible to overarch the low back. And if we do that, we feel it immediately. It doesn't feel good. It feels tense. It's also possible to slightly slump. I think all of us are familiar with that feeling when we're bored in rehearsal and we lean forward on our cellos. So the ideal is in between those two things where there's a buoyancy and you actually do feel like you're sitting directly down on what's called the sits bones. So if we search for that, then there is an effortlessness to be found there. Like we're holding ourselves up. I'm preventing myself from falling over, but I'm not really applying any extra effort to sit up. My spine feels like it's stacked in a good way. And then obviously I talked about mobility earlier. The type of mobility that tends to be useful, that doesn't disturb that, is sort of a gentle side to side mobility like this, which is great because it's what we need and can use a lot in cello playing. So because we are mobile, it doesn't mean we might not move through momentarily a moment where we're more forward or more backward than our norm. But I think, returning to neutral, if we call this neutral, as often as possible. Just like, we return, when we come to the frog, we return our arms to a position that's more neutral than when we're at the tip. So lower back tension, as you mentioned, can build just because of maybe a flaw in the basic posture, or as I said earlier, a rigidity. So decent posture, but sort of not allowing it to have any sort of mobility. So hopefully, if you're dealing with that, those two things together can give you some relief. Next question from Will Hayes. Hi, Will. Which cellists, string players, and or singers do you listen to lately for inspiration? Aha. What's the right way to answer this? I listen to fewer cello players than other string players. And I guess I listen to more piano music. The thing I tend to listen to the most lately is actually piano music, keyboard, like the late Schubert sonatas. The Bach French suites have been a go-to for me recently. So As far as, yeah, I'm just thinking of you're probably looking for specific names. I try to pay attention with cellists to the new recordings of Bach that come out, for example. It's impossible to keep up with all the new recordings that are available. It just is. So if I hear of a cellist that I like has recorded Bach, I will usually make an effort to find that recording, because I feel like that's a pretty revealing statement for a player to make. So I enjoy that. I have not grown tired of listening to the old string players, not old, you know what I mean. Previous generations of string players is what I should say. I'm a big fan of Heinrich Schering, David Oistrakh. Even more recently, because I come from a chamber music background, I grew up idolizing the Guarneri Quartet and their sound. So to me, Arnold Steinhardt has just such a wonderful approach to music and violin playing, and so I will certainly make an effort to listen to him and them, and just to become inspired. Singers, there's a lot. And I guess it varies a little bit. The last two things I listened to were Don Upshaw's recording of The Barber Knoxville, summer of 1915, because we are playing that this week at the Chicago Symphony, and that was the first recording of that piece I got to know, and so I wanted to go back to that recording and see it again. And Elizabeth Schwarzkopf doing Strauss' Four Last Songs with George Zell. I guess those were the last two recordings of singers that I listened to. I love Jesse Norman. There's so many. Joyce DiDonato, more recent. She's very much a presence on the concert stage now. So I'm just kind of throwing random names out there, but these are you asked lately, so these are the ones I've been listening to lately. Another question from Neeraj: in bigger motions in the bow, do you feel the motion initiated all the way from the back muscles? Yes. I don't know that if I put my mind on it, I feel the back muscles, but I guess in a general sense, my brain doesn't feel like it's firing the back muscles first that move the arm, even though that's probably what actually happens. What I feel like is, okay, my shoulder's opening and my upper arm is going to move the bow. So I guess I think the result is the same, but I think a lot of teachers talk about the importance of the back muscles, and it's true, they are super important. But I'm not sure, again, each individual player might find it useful to think, okay, I'm really moving the bow from my back. That may not be useful for everybody. I do certainly think it's useful to think, at least, if not from the back, at least the shoulder and upper arm as being the primary driving mechanism of, a large motion with the bow. So whatever feels least complicated to you is going to be the right answer, I think. Hi, Gloria. And a question here from Peter: in what ways does playing in a professional orchestra differ from your work with chamber music? Do you approach orchestral and chamber repertoire differently? Thank you for that question. I try to conceptually have the two feel as least different as possible. There's no getting around the fact that an orchestra musically has to be a dictatorship. There are too many people, each with their own opinion. So we have a conductor who's obviously imparting a vision to everybody. And in chamber music, as you know, it's very much a different situation. It's a democracy. If you're in a quartet, it's a question of discussing, cajoling, trying different things, and sort of feeling your way to a group interpretation that hopefully satisfies everybody. The possibilities for learning in each one, I think, are are there. They might be slightly different things we learn, because in a chamber music group, we have to be able to give constructive criticism, to find the right words to diplomatically get people to, maybe change things that they're doing. We have to be able to defend our own ideas. We have to be able to accept criticism from others. We have to be able to try their ideas with our whole, put our whole heart into it, even if it's something that seems foreign to us. There's less of that in orchestra, but what there is in orchestra is the demand to just be able to change anything right away, and to be able to, listen to and to get on board with the vision that's coming from the conductor, and, change our playing accordingly, sometimes in fundamental ways. And I find that quite refreshing, to be able to play in different ways, and to play in an orchestra that we might have a collective personality in a broad sense, but on a given week with different repertoire and a different conductor, we can be quite nimble, playing a Haydn symphony and then playing, some French music the next week, something like that. It's rewarding to be able to change like that. In terms of the experience of playing, I think when you say approach orchestral and chamber repertoire differently, in terms of the learning of it, not really. It's still important to understand the whole piece, to know what's going on around you. I probably did more intense score study of chamber works than orchestral works, but it doesn't need to be so. And then obviously when we're in the moment playing, in a best sense, we want an orchestra to feel a bit like a large chamber group, and it happens to have a conductor, and there's a good reason for that, but there's a limit to what conductors can do to really keep things together. And so a lot of the time, especially within a string section or among the woodwind soloists who sit closely together, the responsibility for tuning chords and really, honing articulations is largely with the players. And so in that sense, they really are treating it very much as chamber music in the best sense. So I want that feeling regardless of whether I'm in a small group or in an orchestra. So in my mind, I do my best to make them feel as little different as possible. One other question here from YouTube live audience. I have trouble hearing myself when I'm playing in an orchestra when there are too many low-end sounds around me. How do you focus on your sound? That's a good question, and I dealt with a version of that question a little bit earlier in the chat. There's no quick answer to your question. I would say that the solution usually doesn't involve playing louder necessarily. It can involve trusting what we've practiced. It can involve feeling the resonance of the instrument, and doing our best to hear our stand partner, which is usually the closest sound to us that we can hone in on, and making sure that we're, if we're not matching, usually that's easier to hear. So if you're not hearing, this happening with your sound and your stand partner, then chances are you're blending. I'm sympathetic to the range of the cello, especially on the D string, G string, and especially when other people in the orchestra in the same range are playing. I think it's probably just a part of playing in an orchestra that our sound is not always going to be as audible to us as we want, or certainly not as audible as it is in the practice room. So I guess your question says, how do you focus on your sound? And I guess I could give the advice that focusing only on my sound is of limited use. So I try to focus on the sounds immediately around me, and to make sure that my sound is not going against that. And if it is, I can make some adjustment, but it's not a problem that's unique to you. I want you to know that it's something that we all deal with our chosen instrument, and just the nature of playing in a section. So We do the best we can and try different things. Actually, you could experiment with playing a bit more and seeing if that helps. You could experiment with playing a bit less, seeing if that helps. You could, change your contact point a little bit to make the sound more present and see if that makes it easier to hear yourself. But there are going to be a lot of moments where the collective sound of your section is more important than your individual sound anyway. So there's some comfort to be found in that, I think. Last question is from Jonathan. How has your perspective as a musician and artist changed throughout your career? Wow. Thank you for that. I'm going to do my best to put it in a nutshell. I guess, like most people, I went through in school with my own teachers phases of my development where, shall we say, were very much works in progress and first forming our artistic sensibilities in ways that then will, carry us forward through our lives as musicians. I sometimes call it the conservatory mentality because there are positive and negative aspects to it. But sometimes when we're forming opinions, we gravitate very specifically to this particular thing, this composer, this player, this performance, and to the exclusion of other things. It's like, well, if I like Shostakovich, therefore I can't like Tchaikovsky as much, something like that. I'm being glib now, but just trying to illustrate the point. And so what I've learned through the years is that there are so many beautiful ways to do something. Our work tends to be, as I started out by saying in the chat, incredibly focused. And when we step back, I think one of the things we see is that there is room on this earth in our profession for so many different voices, for so many meaningful and legitimate approaches to music, to the cello. And so I haven't consciously, it wasn't like it was a goal of mine to become more flexible in my listening, but it just kind of happened because as you hear more, as you teach more, as you experience more, and you see, you interact with people, you play chamber music with them, and you see how they think, and we just learn so much from that about different ways of approaching the art that wouldn't necessarily have been at the top of our list, or maybe we were just completely unaware that it was possible to think of something this way. So I've just been so happy to try to be a sponge and to even continue to be a sponge. Teaching is great for that because I learn from my students. Just when you think you've seen everything, every possibility or every issue, somebody comes in and presents you with something new. So that's probably the biggest perspective shift that I've had if I look at myself from way back in my student or early professional days. But it's only been good, and of course it influences my playing, or I try to let it influence my playing in terms of being as open-minded as possible, still with the goals in mind, right? It's if anything goes, then maybe we've lost something. But if we know that the goals of finesse, fluency, simplicity, unity, balance, all the Greek columns that hold up the temple of art generally and music as well. If we're aspiring to those things, there's so many different ways to honor those things. So thank you for the question, and thank you all for all of these great questions. This was wonderful for me, and I hope useful for you as well. So thank you all, and we'll leave it there, and I very much look forward to seeing you soon.
This episode of CelloChat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www.carriagehouseviolins.com. This episode of Cello Chat is brought to you by Carriage House Violins of Johnson String Instrument. Please visit us at www